Hi Googlers and YouTubers. Google is delighted to welcome Professor Prasad Kaipa and Navi Radjou to Talks at Google and the Google Speaker Series here in Hyderabad. Okay? For most of us in India, I think Jugaad is a part of life, right? I think a lot of us growing up have done lots of Jugaads in life, and when we need to, we know how to do it. Navi has taken this concept global with his hugely successful book called Jugaad Innovation. Think frugal, be flexible, and generate breakthrough growth. And he's helped the West understand what we know intuitively, which is bottoms-up approach to innovation. Navi is a fellow at the Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, and a thought leader and strategy consultant to many Fortune 500 companies on innovation and leadership. I went to the Indian School of Business a couple of years ago, and I had the good fortune to attend a lecture Professor Prasad Kaipa gave there. And he spoke about bringing Eastern wisdom perspectives to business management and leadership. I remember walking out of that talk inspired and thinking that was about the time that management theory, which is generally dominated by Western thought, needed an Eastern perspective. Professor Kaipa coaches a number of CEOs and top leaders at Fortune 500 companies, and is also the creator of the Center for Innovation, Leadership, and Change at the Indian School of Business. He also takes practical Vedanta classes in San Francisco on Thursday evenings, and I think that's something, when I'm there, I'm going to try and attend. Together, they have co-authored a new book, From Smart to Wise, and it is our privilege today to hear from them in person, their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Please give a warm Google welcome to Professor Prasad Kaipa and Navi Radjou.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be in Google. I have been in Mountain View, I have been in your Singapore, and I have been in now Hyderabad. What seems to be common is number one, energy. There is a certain vibrancy in just the culture, environment. There is a certain speed with which you resonate. And I think third thing which I also find is there is a lot of smiling faces, which is uncommon. I'm actually puzzled. You know, are you laughing with me or are you laughing at me? I don't know yet. But it is really great to see such, on a Friday afternoon, to have people with a lot of smiles. Two reasons. One, as Krishna was mentioning, the wisdom seems to be an area where we have a lot to say about. In India, we are the source of 5 major religions, but at the same time, many times our approach to managing each other, managing oneself, is more Western than even Westerners deal with. In some respects, it's like we have a schism. During the daytime, we operate in a Western way, but the moment the office hours are over, the Bhangra and the dancing and the fun starts, and the prayers and the various other activities, and where festivals and the work and the life and the fun seamlessly integrate. That one continuous integrity that seems to be the source of energy, source of rejuvenation, source of fun, is something that gives meaning, that gives purpose, and that evokes passion for us to be innovative, for us to be ingenious. How do we tap into that? What is the source of that? Is the question which has been really, in my mind from the time I quit Apple Computer. I was in Apple in international marketing for a while in 1980s. I was in Apple University. I was the head of School of Technology and Management in Apple University, and I was a research fellow looking at future directions in how people learn, how people think, how people create, how people relate, how people lead. So this was in 1988-89 with a friend and partner called Bill Atkinson and more of a guidance from Alan Kay. We began to think about how do we actually design tools that augment human intelligence. I found out after actually spending a large amount of time investigating, inquiring and interviewing about 200 extraordinary people, including many Nobel laureates, brain researchers, spiritual leaders, psychologists, sports personalities, we came back and we tried to see whether we could create a prologue or a artificial intelligence systems to capture some of what makes people energized, what makes people creative, what makes people learn. None of them worked because we found out we can scale up mechanical elements of human ingenuity, but what truly differentiates each one from anybody else, what truly differentiates our own innovation, our own approach to life, how we contribute and how we really become our own brands is not easy to scale it up in that way. I am sure you guys will prove me wrong. That is what I think in more ways than one. From 20 years ago to now, I see a lot of things I thought these are not algorithmic or they are not possible to be scaled up. I think Google has done a significant increase in it. So at that time we realized there is something called learning that leads to innovation and learning that leads to wisdom. One will allow us to do a lot of things in the external world. One will give us a sense of peace, happiness, serenity and equanimity to deal with the external crisis. These two are front of the hand, back of the hand. So when I quit Apple, I thought I will do user interface design. That's where I thought I will get the consulting. But instead, we started getting opportunities to do leadership development and develop adult education programs. 23 years later, when this book came out, we realized what we needed to document was some good stories on how extraordinary people perform, and then how smartness can help us and hurt us. What are the differences in smartness? Some people are great in becoming domain experts, functional smart people who like to stay within their box and go deep down as a hedgehog and become somebody world renowned in their field of expertise, but are unwilling to take risks, but are unwilling to look outside the box and have entrepreneurial sense. On the other side, there are people who are willing to jump from one to another, connect the dots and go broadly, but always need help in executing. To go deep, they need the functional smart people. So for anything to be successful, we need some people who are great in execution, some people who are great in business thinking, if you want to call. Together, they can bring success. We looked at it and said, why do people keep on going on one end of the spectrum? We call it a blue end of the spectrum being the functional smart, red end of the spectrum being the business smart. In between is the freedom, is the place of wisdom. And that is what we have been investigating. We interviewed people like Alan Mulally of Ford, or Indra Nooyi, or Sam Palmisano of IBM, John Mackey of Whole Foods. In India, Narayana Murthy of Infosys, or Kiran Majumdar of Biocon, and there are several people in Tata Group. So we began to look at essentially the story between the West and the East. It is like it's a book written combining the wisdom of India and the wisdom of United States, a lot more. So based on those interviews, we came up with a very simple framework. If you put it as an acronym to make it easy, we call it wisdom. There are in this book we talk about those 6 elements which are represented by each letter of the acronym: working and acting with authenticity and appropriateness. It looks like oxymoron, but we need both of them to be wise. Intelligent and flexible fortitude. Once you take on a project, how long you stay with it, when do you let go, when do you hold on, when do you move on, which requires certain discernment. Shifting the perspective from what I want to what others want, because these days of social network, these days of how we are interconnected, Google Plus, or when you look at it, it is not what you do that makes a difference, but how many people like what you do and they amplify it, multiply it, and begin to do something with some of these ideas. How many ideas that are floating around in the world have originated in you that other people kind of what you call created a viral? That's important. So can I shift the perspective from self-centered to other-centered? D for decision logic. Do we know what part of our important decisions are made by intuition, instinct, emotion, or data? O for openness to change the roles. Sometimes you are the boss on another project, sometimes you are a team member. In some place you are the person who gives all the ideas, in some other project you are the person who needs to implement. But if you get stuck with one role, saying because I have been in this role, I always have to be in that role, you get left behind. So the role clarity, how do I play that? And finally, what are the things you want for short term, medium term, long term, and how do you become productive by discovering your own drivers of motivation? These are 6 things which we touched upon. And if you were to look at the book, first we recommend go check out a website where we have a what you call a wise leader questionnaire assessment. For these 6 wisdom acronyms, each of them we have created some questions. It takes less than 5 minutes for you to fill it out. If you go to fromsmart2wise.com, you can actually go take the assessment, see where the baseline is, and get the book and read 1 chapter at a time. Don't read the whole book at one time. Read 1 chapter. See what you can take and practice. Discuss with other people, because these days, put it on Facebook what you are doing and discuss what other people are looking at. See what you can, in your own Google circles, what are all the ways in which other people are thinking about it. And then once you feel like you got it into your DNA, move on to the other one. So that is how we have written the book. And so I have given you just broadly the framework, and I'll let Navi say a few words and then we can take some questions on that.
Sure. I mean, Prasad did a great job in terms of outlining the contours of this wisdom framework. But essentially, in a nutshell, something to kind of clarify. So wisdom for us is the application of intelligence to serve a larger purpose. So what we are saying is not that you need to kind of dial down your smartness, but find the kind of right purpose where you can apply it in a very context-aware fashion. The second kind of piece of definition of wise leadership is this balancing act between action and reflection and introspection. So because what we find is a lot of smart leaders get carried away by action. And we were just talking to a lot of companies last 10 days. One of the big questions they asked us was, look, we have to meet shareholders' expectations, quarterly returns are still important, so it's all about action, action, action. But we were just talking to a large IT service company, we were saying, look, you are facing a lot of competition in the marketplace right now, where if you only focus on action, which is how can we reclaim our lost market share, you lose an opportunity to step back a bit and reflect and introspect to figure out what caused this downfall in the first place and how can we regain our past glory by reconnecting with our authentic self. And that is often seen as luxury because we are all driven in real-time kind of mode all the time. So I just want to kind of say that essentially a nice way to remember wisdom is many of you might be developers, you know the language C++. So think about wisdom being S++, smartness plus plus. So it's not about relinquishing your smartness, but applying your smartness in a context-aware fashion. That's the first plus, recognizing the context keep changing all the time. And then make sure that you apply your smartness with the right intent and right motivation. Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to show off how smart I am, it's more about how can I use my smartness to serve a larger purpose. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. It's about smart plus plus.
Yeah. So for example, you can ask a question, right? When you come into the room, into any team meeting, will people be excited, or when you leave the team meeting, would people be more excited? Think about that, because that's a sign. Without you opening your mouth, they opening their mouth, they can actually tell you about your contribution. Similarly, you need to look at it and say, when I have a noble purpose to take care of my people, your productivity can be much higher. Actually, there is a research that shows in an IT industry, the productivity of a person who is passionate, engaged and clear is 13 times more productive than another average employee. This is 1300% increase between an average employee and an extraordinary employee who is passionate, finds meaning and energy. So think about it. Let's look at how we can take it forward, and please, we are open to questions and comments.
Hello, so my name is Sajna. When you talk about, say, business thinking or strategic thinking versus domain-specific specialities, I think a lot of the times it's your natural inclination to go towards one or the other. How difficult or easy? I believe it's difficult to pick up the other side of the spectrum. So how do you recommend we do it?
The best way I recommend you do it is first recognizing there are limitations to my way of thinking. If we do not recognize that there is value in the other side and there is a way in which they can complement our way of thinking, first of all, whatever we do becomes very superficial. It may be appropriate, but it will never be authentic. So first step is to acknowledge the weakness. That is the hardest part several times for smart people, isn't it? First, we need to be willing to learn from there. Second step would be to recognize that even if they say something, it won't necessarily make very much sense to us. If you ask them to explain it in a way you can understand, you can act upon, you will both be frustrated. So what is most appropriate to move from one end of the spectrum to other end of the spectrum is to take what are some steps. They may give 5 recommendations. Pick one that is easy and pick one that you are comfortable with. Low hanging fruit we talk about right now, you take that step and then move to the next step, and essentially have them as some kind of a mentor or a coach. Tell them, I'm going to take the risk, but you need to help me to be successful. So other person's job is not to criticize and find faults with you, but encourage, appreciate and help you along the path. If we can create a relationship with people who are on the other side of the spectrum, by the way, as you can see, this works very well even with relationships. This is not just about a workplace situation. Whatever we are talking about as wisdom is also about, like for example, to take it practically, what Navi brings, what I bring are extremely complementary. He was a vice president of Forrester Research, a great analyst. He knows how to write things. He is his reports are world famous on innovation and India and some of them. And I am a guy, what you call, I pass gas through my mouth most of the time. That is what I call teaching. So in some respects, if I have to write, it becomes a major problem because I think a big vision, I try to look at a big picture and then I try to articulate. But the moment we started working together, he started asking me structured questions. But for me, those are the hardest thing. It's like being straitjacketed. As a professor, I like to pontificate and talk big things. But he said, but how do you do that? He said, can you tell me in 3 sentences what you are talking about?
Forrester training, right?
Forrester training.
Everything in 3 bullets.
3 bullets.
You cannot explain in 3 bullets.
Right.
Even the biggest idea.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So in the process of it, we began to write first blogs. It was interesting. We were able to really crank out some very good blogs on HBR. They started showing up in the top 5. So we knew that the way to do that is greatness from two partners when they are created as 1 + 1 making it 11. I couldn't do what we could do together, he couldn't do what we could do together, so we began to do small steps. Once we became comfortable, we started writing this book. And in the process, of course, we went through ups and downs, and there were times we were ready to break up. It was like marriage pretty much. But in that process, we realized as long as we have a larger purpose and we have respect for each other, I'm willing to learn. Even after 3 years of working with him, I have so much to learn. Even in this 10-day book tour, I'm actually recognizing several elements of him I had not recognized in my 3 years of partnership. When that rekindles, when you come with a certain feeling that you don't know so much about the other person, you might have put them in a box, but you are willing to learn what is the new thing that is shining, and you are willing to appreciate that. That's a partnership for much cleaner, much more what you call a value creating kind of partnership. That's what you need to do to be a wise leader, to move from one end to the other end. Begin with small steps, trust the other person, let the other person guide you, at a time to create value that is meaningful for both of you, and recognize there will be a lot of failures, but be resilient. Those are, I think, as you can see, these are steps for a successful personal relationships as well as team relationships. That's how we apply what we are talking about.
The only thing I would add is that there's a way you can do that is Intel, to give a very concrete example, a lot of the IT executives, they are sent on a rotation program. They have to go live and breathe with the business side of the house. So the idea is that you begin to shift your perspective from an I-shaped person, you become a T-shaped person. So there are ways actually where you can actually create that empathy, and at Walmart they say you have to think like a retailer. That's the mandate of IT executives. So the empathy you create only, but you get exposed to the end users. So I think there are ways you can actually artificially, or using tools, to shift and broaden the perspective of especially the functional leaders.
So I was reading about this thing called a philosopher king, where a king would never be a philosopher and vice versa. Yeah. And I've noticed that issues with leadership and issues with generally smart people often start with something called the ego. I just want to know, have you all addressed that in the book, where learning happens only when you drop all your ego and you are insecure, and the more you learn, the more insecure you get, and that's kind of a cyclical process. So I want to know if you all have kind of addressed this thing, and studying about, I was recently reading about how generally most leaders are also the most narcissistic people you'll find in the world. So I wanted to know if you all have addressed these things in the book and kind of called it out.
First of all, it's important to clarify that you're right. Most smart people are self-centered and often selfish. Yeah. It's very important to recognize that we are not recommending in the book that you go from being a very self-centered, selfish person to a selfless person. In that case, you have to become a Swami, a monk, right? That's fine. But we introduce a middle path, or middle ground. We call it enlightened self-interest. That means, to use an American English expression, that the rising tide will lift all boats. Yeah. And the reason that a lot of smart leaders we think are self-centered is because their view of the marketplace or the environment is very much based on a zero-sum game mindset. That is that the pie is of a fixed size. So unless I get a piece of it as big as I can, I'm going to leave it to the competitor, right? The wise leaders, they go into a co-creation mode. In other words, they say, look, I have the confidence to bring in the whole ecosystem to actually co-create this pie. So the bigger I can make the pie and have the power to make it, then everybody gets a bigger slice. So in a nutshell, that's what we mean by enlightened self-interest. So for example, case in point, Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, has set a goal to double the company's revenues by 2020 while reducing environmental impact by 50%. It's about doing more with less. Now, is he doing it out of altruism? He himself on record went to say, no, this is enlightened self-interest. Because if I save on natural resources, I save on cost. And these cost savings I can pass on to the customer. And then the shareholders are happy, right? So thinking in a more holistic fashion, in a more systemic fashion, that is also the hallmark of wise leaders. Versus the smart leaders, they have a very fragmented view of the world. For them, it's like doubling revenues, I can crack the code on it. Oh, saving the environment, let's ask the CSR department to do that. But bringing them together, bridging them and integrating that, that's really in a way what is why leadership about.
So to build on that, as individuals, as managers, we do three things. What are we going to do is one question, and then how are we going to get it done is the second question, but rarely ask the question why are we doing it. We get into the minutiae of what and how, but we lose why. That's when exactly the ego becomes an issue. Like for example, take Shah Rukh Khan. In one movie he may be a beggar, in another movie he may be a killer, in another movie he may be a romantic hero. It doesn't matter what it is, you can sit down and see him and say, wow, he lived this role. But he is laughing all the way to the bank no matter what role he plays. Isn't that correct? We are the one, if we like it, we spend 5 times we go to the movie and making him richer and richer. Why is that important? He knows behind the actor's role that he plays that he is Shah Rukh Khan. There is a clarity, but he engages with the role fully knowing at the end of the movie he goes back to being the Shah Rukh Khan. That means the work that you do does not change the personality behind that. If you have that role clarity, then any project you take on, you don't become obsessed by it. You may have passion for it, you may have commitment for it, but if somebody comes in and say, change the role, if that is the best you can do. We have seen entrepreneurs where they start a company in Silicon Valley. One guy took it from 0 to $70 million, and then Kleiner Perkins said, we need to bring in an external CEO because now you are having multiple products and multiple customers, we need different experience. This guy said, no, I won't step down. I have built it from 0 to 70, what makes you think I can take it from 70 to 100? But look at your own Google, Larry Page and Brin. So if you look at it, they started it, they brought somebody in, let the other person run, you become an understudy, and when you think it is right time, you come back and take it. That is called having a role clarity about when do you need to become a learner and when do you become what you call a person who is a teacher. If you have that clarity, then you see, even when you go home, you will not necessarily have the Google personality. Google will become part of your personality. It is important. Otherwise, many young people like you, Gen X and Gen Y, when you have a clarity about what you are contributing, where you are contributing, and what is expected of you in terms of your contribution, you will not get burnt out. You will have a longer passion and a clearer set of goals, and also your innovation will be at the sharpest. I think that is where I think the ego gets clarified without emotion getting too entangled with it. Think about it even in personal relationships.
So, hi. You made an interesting comment saying that sometimes you think we are more Western than the Westerners, right? So when it comes to corporate psyche, what do you think is the elementary difference between the way Westerners think and the way Easterners think? And also, what is it that you think we don't leverage enough as Easterners from our culture, from our values? Because we are just dealing with the onslaught of a lot of Western culture. So it'd be good to see some inputs from you on that.
Sure. In my first book on Frugal Innovation, I tackled that topic, that essentially anybody who drives in Indian streets know that if you follow the rules and drive in a very structured fashion, you are going to die, right? So this is a culture where essentially everything is unstructured. We operate on Indian Standard Time, which is very different than the GMT. So we all know that. So the question is, this comes literally, we're discussing about it. It's a very important observation because it comes back to one of the critical attributes of wise leadership, which is how do you try to be authentic and appropriate? You have to be authentic as Indians working in a Western company. So there are certain procedures, rules that they have to follow. That's what makes you appropriate. But what happens is the same way with wisdom, and that's why these two books go hand in hand, because ingenuity is jugad, And wisdom is also something that we hear about when we go to temples in the weekends, or we hear families talk about in the evenings. But somehow both what we discovered is that when people show up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at work, throughout the day we forget about it. Rather, we try to be appropriate. We're going to follow the corporate procedures and rules, etc. But if there's a way to integrate both, that will be very powerful. And case in point is Renault-Nissan, the French car maker. They are now coming to India to learn about Jugaad, because they realized that they have used what they call frugal innovation, which is they came up with the $5,000 car in France, in Europe. Now they say we have to create a car which is 50% cheaper. But you cannot do that unless you change your way you think. And for that, you cannot do that out of Europe. So literally in Chennai, they're opening a frugal engineering center out of where they're going to create the next generation low-cost vehicles. And the reason they're opening it in Chennai is because out of India, they think that this unstructured way of thinking leads to disruptive innovation. The more structured you are, you can come up with incremental innovation. So if they try to do a disruptive innovation in a European context, what they will come up with may not be disruptive. So I think one of the things we are hoping is that this book and my first book is basically an attempt for Indians to take pride in what sometimes we take for granted. We may have, or maybe we practice it in a very kind of subconscious way, but it's so kind of fragmented, right? Because we do that in private lives, but we don't do that, in a professional lives. So that's my kind of part of answer. So
I'll give it from a personal side. I have been living in United States for 32 years. There was a time in Apple when I had to give a presentation for John Scully in Japan in artificial intelligence conference. Because I was representing John Scully, they went through and they asked me to go to Regis McKenna's group and spend a lot of time both for accent reduction and to represent an American company in Japan, and I need to be able to represent the brand. So we went through several days of accent reduction. They said, when I say think, I need to say it like this, but I haven't figured out how much I should stick my tongue out instead of making myself clear to other people. Or they said, when you use some words, you need to slow down. Indians speak so fast.
Machine gun.
Like a machine gun approach. And especially when you talk about organization and some of these words, they've got completely different meaning if you are not careful. So in that process, after spending time with them, I gave a talk which was like my almost ready for talk. At that time, Regis McKenna sat down. He came back and he put his hand around me and said, if you don't mind, please unlearn everything what we taught you. We want you to go back to your Indian accent. I said, why? They said, when you speak with Indian accent, your eyes light up. There is intensity and there is a gesticulation and there is you are present. When you spoke the way in which you are supposed to speak, you represented the brand. But the value of the brand you represent is so bland, we don't care about it.
yes,
I am suggesting to us, in the name of becoming Western, sometimes it is like a yin and the yang. You need to see what is your being. Of course you may ask, what is this word being? Being is like Prasad has a certain way of being oneself. There is a way of expressing oneself. If I want to make a lighter vein of it, Prasad keeps on prasading. Wherever I go, it doesn't matter whether interaction is 10 minutes or 20 minutes, who I am comes through when I am authentic. Another way of saying being is being authentic. On the other thing is the doing, which is the performance. If I am actually depriving my Indianness, depriving my Westernness, depriving my Japaneseness, and if I try to fit in, if I try to be appropriate, whether with my clothes, whether it is with my accent, whether it is with my interests, then what makes me unique and contribute to that job will be completely killed. So my ingenuity if I take on what my colleagues' work is, it is translating creativity into innovation depends on your ingenuity. Indian ingenuity is called jugaad. There is a Chinese ingenuity, Brazilian ingenuity, American ingenuity. Some of them are represented by Apple and Google and some of that stuff. We need to know what is that essence. Keep the essence, drop the rest. Then you have an ability to integrate East and the West extraordinarily uniquely, and while you are building the brand of your company, you are not losing the authenticity of who you are. The wise leadership is about being yourself while doing what needs to get done. When you do that, you are not only enhancing your personal brand, you are actually enhancing the corporate brand, because the diversity will give you different sets of ideas, and that ingenuity translates into coming up with Indian products that may have worldwide application because you brought your Indian thinking into Western problem solving. I think that is where we can be wise without losing our smartness. And I hope that's what you can take away from this conversation.